Thank you, Irina. We'll just give it a minute before we start. 3 o'clock London time, 4 o'clock Munich time. So please be patient for a minute, dear guests, while other colleagues join us. Thank you. Well, a warm welcome and good afternoon from London, where it's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in Munich, and good morning to colleagues in the Americas and good evening to those of you in Asia Pacific who are joining us. Welcome to today's Allianz Risk Barometer webinar. And in the next hour, we're going to be looking at what are the major business risks for 2026. Let's see who we've got on our panel today, who's going to help us. My name is Hugo Kidston from the communications team, and I'm very pleased to introduce 4 distinguished speakers from my colleagues. We have Thomas Sepp, a board member of Allianz Commercial and our Chief Claims Officer, dialing in from Munich. Good afternoon to you, Thomas.
Good afternoon, Hugo.
We have Teresa Stevens, who runs our regional cyber tech and media practice in North America and the US. Hello there, Teresa.
Hello, Hugo.
And Michael Brook, our head of Global Risk Consulting Advisory Services, normally to be seen in Munich, but today I'm told he's in Stockholm. Hello, Michael.
Hello. Hi, Hugo.
And finally, but by no means least, Sergeant Todorovic. Serge, as he's known, our head of Global Political Violence and Hostile Environmental Solutions here in London. Welcome to you, Serge.
Thanks, Hugo.
Now let's take a look at today's agenda. We're going to start off with a quick explanation of the barometer, how we find these results, how we survey you for the responses. We're going to look, with Thomas's help, at what are the most important global risks for businesses in 2026. And then we're going to take a deep dive into one of 3 topics. We're going to start with cyber and Teresa. We're going to look at AI with Michael, and then lastly, political risks and violence with Serge. And there'll be the opportunity at the end to ask a few questions. So with that, let's go and have a look at the actual methodology of the survey. And on the next slide, you will see that this is the 15th year we have run the Allianz Risk Barometer. What we do is we conduct a survey, a detailed survey, with customers and brokers and industry experts around the world. We had over 97 countries. We're going for 100 next year. 97 countries or territories taking part with over 3,000 respondents. So a very healthy audience. Thank you for taking part if you are among them. They represented 23 industry sectors. So we have a lot of granularity and in both in sectors and in country-based perspectives. And this survey took place in October and November last year, 2025. And from that, we can derive a lot of insights, which I'm now going to hand over to Thomas Sepp, our Chief Claims Officer, to introduce what are the key findings from the survey. Thomas, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Hugo. Then let's move forward. This is the consolidated view, what we see in terms of most important business risks for 2026 that was derived from the survey, which background Hugo just explained. I think it's quite a remarkable outcome this time, because what we quite often have seen over recent years is that the listing of those different risks tends to be relatively stable. I think we saw a couple of movements that are probably worth pointing out. I will quickly go through a few of them. We have on the next page then a few more details to talk about. The one at the top, cyber risk, that remains stable. It was the number 1 last year. It's the number 1 for 2026. And as we saw on the agenda, Teresa will deep dive into that in more detail. What's probably worth highlighting there is that it's 38% of listings that put cyber on the top of it. That went actually quite up relatively to last year, despite the fact, it's 42, it was 38, and further increased relatively to last year. The one that jumped significantly is the artificial intelligence topic. I talk a little bit more about it on the next page, but it's not a surprise because it's on everybody's minds and we share a few thoughts around that. I think those two things also became stronger and pushed other things down the priority list. Business interruption a little bit, but I would in particular highlight natural catastrophes and climate change on number 5 and 6. Those have been higher in the past, but I think we just see now in the analysis and the questionnaire that those got superseded by the other top risks mentioned over here. Maybe the last one I would like to touch on is number 7, political risks and violence. It's probably worth pointing out that we did run the survey in last October, November, when I think some of the discussions around the US imposing tariffs had eased out a little bit. I would be pretty confident if we would rerun it now again in the light of what happened on the world political stage, being it Iran, Venezuela, and other places, that might regain in importance. So in that sense, we're also looking at a snapshot, and it's sometimes important to put that timing into context. But as I said in the beginning, quite a bit of movement relative to previous years, and it's interesting to see what moved up and what moved down in terms of superseding longer-term risks that were mentioned, but probably more short-term ones. If we move forward a page, we picked out a few just to highlight. I think cyber tops the global ranking as a high in supply chain risks mount. And by the way, that's very, very consistent around the world. So that's a topic or risk consideration that sits high everywhere. AI jumps up to number 2. It's seen as a complex source of risks, in addition to bringing benefits and opportunities. And I think that's what actually reflects in it. We see many companies, including ourselves, going through the journey about where can we use it, what will it bring to us, what benefits will it have, but also what risks will it have. Benefits obviously around automation of administrative tasks, better insights into standard processes, enhanced analytics, faster programming, faster coding. There's going to be a lot of good things around it, but a lot of them also come with flip side. So simple one, I use it more for coding. The ball goes back to Teresa. Will my cyber proposition be stronger or weaker afterwards? I think it's something that needs to be discussed. Or if you use AI into advisory processes, what happens to the liability? What happens if AI gives wrong advice? Does it need to be controlled? Or who needs to be responsible for it at the end? And I think that's all those elements that make it, on the one hand side, an exciting topic, but also one that people report to us on it. It has risks attached to it, which we're trying to understand and work our way through it. Geopolitical risk remains, as I said before. I think we looked at a time where there was some ease around it, that tension built up again, and it will have and has impacts on supply chains, which puts them under pressure and under more risk of breaking in a point in time. AI risks rise. As risks rise, just 3% of supply chains viewed as very resilient. That's then the consequence of it. Then we have integrated resilience strategies that are needed to address complex and systematic risks. And AI and other technologies can help to adapt to changing risk landscape because it's a useful tool to see bigger patterns and actually work from them, mitigation strategies, how you can actually work and control the risks that you are exposed to. We do that survey, and that's reflected on the next page, obviously around the world. And we can also do the different analytics per geography, per country in the world. I will not run through all the details, what sits on number 1 and number 2 and number 3 around the different countries in the world. But I would just encourage everyone who is interested in it, please go to our webpage, download the report, and pick out the countries you are interested in. It's actually quite encouraging to see on the one hand side, there's a high degree of consistency, but we also see different countries that have slightly different emphasis on the risks that are being listed as most relevant ones, i.e. the top 3. Go to it, use it. We think it's a valuable tool. We use it a lot ourselves, and it helps us to work on our own position in terms of an insurer about what the things are out there that we need to be prepared for and provide solutions to our clients. I would like to leave it with that and would give it over to Teresa, I believe, for cyber.
Thank you, Thomas, and hello, everyone. So cyber incidents have consistently ranked as the top risk globally on the Allianz Risk Barometer for 5 years now. And it's really no surprise given how closely connected cyber risk is with the other top ranked risks, such as AI, business interruption, and changes in legislation and regulation. The incidence of ransomware attacks continues to rise year over year, and threat actors are increasingly leveraging new technology like AI to more effectively exploit their targets' vulnerabilities. Cyber attacks often lead to business interruption events, and which can pose an existential threat to organizations that don't have sufficient incident response and restoration plans. The technological revolution is also in many ways challenging lawmakers to define best practices to deploy tech while also safeguarding the rights of individuals, which is in turn challenging organizations to interpret and operationalize a myriad of, at times, very different or untested requirements that are imposed by regulators in different international jurisdictions. It's quite frankly a lot of change for businesses to keep up with, and it's impacting companies across all industries and of all sizes. Cyber risk it's a mighty common denominator. Next slide, please. So the cost to keep up with the threat is also steep. CISOs routinely cite that traditional defenses are no match for new AI-enabled attacks. And new technology significantly lowers the barrier for entry for cyber criminals, so that you can have these even relatively unskilled threat actors successfully compromise their targets. Many suggest that the path forward is to sort of fight fire with fire, so to speak, and invest in AI-enabled security, which can carry pretty significant upfront costs to organizations to implement, but should pay off in the long term. And cybercrime is unfortunately still very lucrative. While it's challenging to get hard data on ransom payments due to the nature of these events, the FBI reported that over 16.6 billion US dollars was paid in ransoms in the US alone in the year 2024. And while many nations have enacted laws prohibiting the payment of cyber ransoms, the sort of patchwork of laws don't apply universally across all segments. And for those businesses that are navigating a cyber extortion event in real time, they're often facing both reputational risk and, quite frankly, an ethical dilemma. And it can be really challenging for them to determine the best path forward. Additionally, on the investment side, organizations struggle to hire skilled workforce in cybersecurity. And this is really just that the demand is high and the supply, particularly beyond entry-level positions, is notoriously low. Experienced cybersecurity resources are quite expensive, and this has led many companies to outsource their security to third-party managed security providers, which comes with its own risks as well, but we'll double-click on that in a moment. The skills gap isn't just on the CISO side of the house either. A large percentage of cyber incidents are still caused by employees in other functions falling prey to social engineering attacks and business email compromise. This is why implementing zero trust models becomes so important. If companies operate under the assumption that they will be breached and they implement principles of least privileged access, things like MFA and microsegmentation, they can prevent lateral movement and put sort of an upper limit on the amount of potential harm a threat actor can achieve. Unfortunately, zero trust is also not zero cost. So upgrading legacy systems and transitioning to more secure setups can be expensive. However, fortunately, businesses are often taking a phased approach to the improvement because, again, they're thinking about that long-term ROI. Next slide, please. Cyber is also consistently a top risk due to the interconnectivity of global businesses and a growing reliance on third parties and digital supply chains. In 2024, we saw attacks on suppliers like Change Healthcare and CDK Global lead to massive downstream impacts to customers of these providers. The Change Healthcare event alone caused significant delays in care delivery and financial consequences for many in the healthcare sector, as they touched reportedly 1 in every 3 patient records in the United States. The CDK event also disrupted approximately 15,000 car dealerships. So these are massive systemic events. And in 2025, the Jaguar Land Rover or JLR cyber attack caused a 5-week shutdown of major plants and had a £1.9 billion impact to the UK economy. The UK government ended up backing JLR with a £1.5 billion, pound loan to support its supply chain. And not all threats to digital supply chains are malicious. In 2025, we also saw several outages with cloud service providers caused by failed updates, configuration errors, and just capacity issues that led to service disruptions to downstream businesses. And so these events are really highlighting our global reliance on a handful of providers and in some ways the fragility of our digital infrastructure. The threat of adversarial technological advancement also exists in this digital supply chain space as well. Within just the last 24 hours, there have been reports of a recent AI-assisted cloud breach where an intruder gained full administrative access in just 8 minutes, which is obviously terrifying, but maybe a good segue to pass the mic over to my colleague, Michael, to discuss a bit more about AI.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. So what we have seen is really a big jump. So cyber incidents remain the number one, but artificial intelligence really has surged to the number 2 spot, climbing from number 10 now in just a single year. And we haven't seen such a jump ever in the Allianz Risk Barometer. That tells us 2 things. So first of all, AI is no longer niche technology. It's really becoming woven into the daily fabric of business operations across all industries. And second, it's not only transformative, it's also a source of complex, systemic, fast evolving risk and business opportunities. Of course, not forget about the business opportunities. So what we can say is AI is really expanding from isolated use cases. You know about the customer service bots or predictive maintenance, where it was heavily invested into, but now it's really going into core process, decision-making, automation, logistics, fraud detection, and many more. So, and it's really this combination of speed and scale, which creates also new exposures. I want to illustrate that with some examples, loss examples, which happened over the last years. So the first one is deepfake voice and video. So in early 2024, a finance worker at a multinational firm in Hong Kong was defrauded of $25 million by scammers using advanced AI deepfake technology. And this case didn't start very spectacular. So the employee initially received a phishing email, supposedly from the UK-based chief financial officer, requesting a secret transaction for confidential acquisition. But on top of that, there was a video call, really to dispel doubts. So the employee was invited to a video call where all other attendees appeared to be familiar, and real employees, including the CFO. So in reality, these were deepfake recreations based on publicly available video with AI-generated voices. The second example is a research from the Dallas College of Law, which describes this AI bias in lending decisions. So real borrowers being denied credit or charged higher interest rates due to algorithmic bias in AI-powered credit scoring systems. And this shows these discriminatory outcomes really then also on top of that triggered regulatory scrutiny and highlighted how AI can really unintentionally amplify historic inequities. This third example is about the reputational risk. So AI-generated content damaging brand trust. And this example is from the fashion brand Mango, which faced significant customer backlash after using fully AI-generated models to display clothing. So customers really challenged then the authenticity and accuracy of product representations, ultimately really questioning whether the clothes or even the models were real. So all those cases demonstrate why AI has become a top-tier business risk, and failures are no longer really theoretically, they are really happening in real operations, supply chains, and customer interactions. Next slide. So based on our survey, AI risk clusters mainly in 3 main categories. So the first one is around operational risk. Really, AI failures can halt production, disrupt logistics, or amplify errors and at machine speed. It really can stop multi-million euro production line instantly. And the second big topic is about legal and compliance risk. So the example of this credit scoring example and hiring algorithms, they really have triggered investigations under consumer protection, anti-discrimination laws, and data protection regulations. So that means even when unintended, biased outcomes can result in serious regulatory consequences. And the third a big risk category is reputational risk, as demonstrated by the example of Mango. So that means AI-generated content that misrepresents products or people can lead to consumer backlash, and companies relying on generative tools without adequate oversight risk really eroding customer trust quite quickly. So together, these cases show how AI risk is already really materializing across industries. How companies are responding. What we have heard from the survey, so they are upgrading AI governance frameworks. So companies are really adopting then model inventories, validation gates, and human in the loop controls. And I think that's a very important element to bring that in. It will not kind of, you have to train the people in responsible AI practices and automated processes. Doesn't mean you can ignore the human interaction. It's rather the contrary. The other topic is really developing AI-specific crisis response plans. So similar, much like cyber incidents response plans, firms are really preparing for misinformation events, model malfunction, or unsafe system behavior. All of this really reflects a maturing understanding. So AI is powerful, but without governance, it's unpredictable. Next slide. So companies are investing in upskilling employees. We are seeing reshaping roles, hiring AI governance specialists, building ethical oversight committees. Also, we in Allianz and also in Allianz Commercial, Allianz Risk Consulting already have AI-based tools in place and are currently developing use cases that support our risk experts, for example, with faster, more accurate, and more consistent risk assessments. And I want to point out as well, you as leaders, for example, it's essential that we really actively support and guide our teams in adopting, applying artificial intelligence. So AI is not just a technical challenge, it's really also a people challenge. That means leaders must create an environment where their teams feel empowered to experiment with AI tools, ask questions, and share their experiences. So both on the success side, but also on the challenges side. I would say in general, in a nutshell, I would say at least for the next years, short term, maybe also midterm, AI definitely will not replace the workforce, but it will require a more adaptable and higher skilled one. What we're seeing as well is AI is definitely a systemic risk amplifier. AI interacts with nearly all top 10 risks. It amplifies cyber risk. It increases business interruption risk, influences political risk, where, for example, AI-generated disinformation is now, unfortunately, a kind of geopolitical tool as well. It heightens market risk with warnings of an emerging AI bubble. So it's really a risk category, but also a risk multiplier. Your answers have shown as well that many of you see the opportunity side, and that is definitely a big opportunity for the global economy. So just to bring up some figures, so McKinsey, for example, estimates AI could unlock up to $4.4 trillion in annual productivity, value creation, and reinvestment. Really, rather than cutting headcount, leaders are reinvesting in AI-driven productivity, new AI capabilities, and it's also a talented advantage. So the opportunity is really clear. Companies that invest in accessible continuous upskilling will out-execute competitors who don't. And AI can also elevate the workforce and expand value pools when leaders really pair the technology with skills, governance, and redesign processes. So to close, AI, I would say in a nutshell, is not inherently dangerous, but unmanaged AI is. And the organizations, the companies that thrive in 2026 and beyond will be those that combine the innovation with responsibility. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Serjan.
Thanks, Michael. Hopefully you can all hear me. So yeah, my name is Serjan Torovic. I head up the political violence and hostile environment solutions team at Allianz. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the results that I've seen, give you a little bit more flavor, and also give some regional variety. Then I'm also going to look at really why are risk professionals, brokers, clients, and underwriters voting for this. So hopefully you're going to get this from the next 10 minutes or so. As you can see, the political violence and risk has risen to number 7. There are a number of reasons for this, which I'll explore. The war peril in particular has risen to number 1 from number 2 in 2025. This has taken 53% of the vote this year from 48% the prior year. SRCC, which is civil unrest and threats, have moved down to number 2 within the political risk and political violence category. That vote share has gone from 51% to 49%. And then terrorism and sabotage has stayed at number 3. I'm going to guess a lot of the voting in this particular segment is due to the sabotage risk, but which we can talk about in a few minutes. And the percentage of the vote has risen from 40% last year to 46%. Looking a little bit more at the regional variations, so political risk and political violence was number 5 in a number of countries, so UK, Europe, France, Turkey and Colombia. And it has risen to number 10 in US, Australia, and which surprised me, in the neutral Switzerland. So that does show you that there is a real risk and a concern around the political risk and political violence space. Looking a little bit further, in Europe, unsurprisingly, the war risk, you can move on, that's fine, thank you. The war risk has been voted as number 1 in Europe with 62% of the vote, with terror being a number 2 at 47%. It may not come as a surprise that for the French results, specifically the SRCC risk was voted in at number 1, and this received 82% of the French vote. So you can really see that even within the Europe itself, there are big variations in terms of risks and risk perception. Moving on to Asia Pac, war is number 1, and this received 58% of the vote, with protectionism receiving 54% of the vote in 2026, and SRCC with 48% as a number 3. Looking specifically at the results, and well, looking at 2025 in particular, it probably doesn't come as a surprise that if we look at China, if we pluck China out of these results, the 82% of the respondents state that protectionism and government interference, which would include, of course, tariffs, is their main concern. So you can see again, even in the Asia Pac region, how this varies. Within the Americas, SRCC is the main concern. It has been for a number of years. as Hugo mentioned, there is the vote took place at the end of last year. If the same survey was sent out today, we may see war and interstate conflict potentially rising up the risk standings. Interestingly, in the US, protectionism and tariffs are #1 concern, and that's with 58% of the votes. And then, as we alluded to, disinformation and misinformation and AI became a #2 risk from a political risk and political violence perspective. So you can really see the variation in the regional, but obviously the global, the results show that war is the risk that we should be concerned about going forward. And let me give you some examples and reasons why. So looking back in my rearview mirror and looking at 2025, I think we saw some big events. Some events that were there throughout 2025, some that reared their head during that year. Ukraine conflict, Ukraine and Russia war is still here, and there is no end in sight. There certainly wasn't in 2025. There were changing tactics in the way that the war was conducted, but ultimately the lines are pretty frozen and the conflict continues, which instantly or inevitably affects the mindset of businesses. The Israel and Gaza war escalated to a 12-day war between Israel and Iran. I would say that this is a really big pivot point in the Middle East from the type of conflict we may be seeing in the future, because the US was directly involved in attacking Iran and neutralizing its nuclear capabilities. So I think the boundaries are certainly shifted in the Middle East, and what we may expect going forward is potentially more of the same. Beyond the constant headlines of Ukraine and Israel and Gaza conflict, and of course Iran and Israel, we saw other conflicts emerge during the 2025. So we saw skirmishes between India and Pakistan in the Kashmir region. We saw equally skirmishes between Thailand and Cambodia, and these still continue to this day despite the peace efforts of the United States. And more frozen conflicts, I suppose, or less covered. So we see Ethiopia, Sudan and DRC plunging deeper into a more bloody civil conflict in various regions. So you can see easily why war is the main risk that the survey brought back. But apart from the direct conflict, there is also a grey zone concern that our clients have. And what I mean by grey zone is I'm looking in particular at the sabotage element or state-sponsored sabotage. So there could be an argument that the war, the physical element, has certainly been there in 2025. If you look at also the events around it, particularly around Europe, you see that there's been a big increase in the last 18 months of sabotage and state-sponsored sabotage incidents. So I think the Associated Press recently reported that there were over 140 sabotage acts between the beginning of 24 and the end of 25. And most of these are attributable to Russian state-sponsored acts or Russian agents one way or another. However, that's not exclusively related to these. There are also some environmental sabotage events, as we saw recently in Germany. So that's covering off really the war and conflict. Where I want to move on to next is the strikes, riots and civil commotion. So SRCC is a topic that's been around certainly on our radar much more since 2019. The prevalence, the severity and also the frequency of SRCC events is clear to see. So beyond the wars and the sabotage risk, SRCC continues to rise as a risk peril. And it is a bit of a perfect storm in regards to why, the motivations why. So we see variety of motivations. Economic and general financial health of countries is certainly one, which includes the cost of living crisis, of course, which is motivating more protests against governments. We see distrust in the mainstream politicians and politics, and the subsequent rise of populism, which in my opinion, is generally based around politics of division and discontent. Further to that, there is also disinformation. Combining those first two with disinformation and deep fakes, as we sometimes see, videos and wrong headlines, we are facing potentially increased SRCC activity globally again in the following year, in the next year or so. And then moving on to terrorism, which is another peril, of course, which is traditionally talked together with sabotage. The risk of far-right terrorism in Europe is certainly on the rise. We see that because the whole political spectrum and the political shift has moved to the right in most of Europe and to some extent globally. So we see far-right extremists as a big risk, and this is certainly the fastest growing terrorist risk in Europe. Beyond that, we also see some growth in Islamist terrorism, and this is resulting from the rise or the re-emergence of ISIS in Saharan Africa in particular. So ISIS is now re-establishing its foothold in this region, and it's dusting off the old playbook which it used a few years ago when it was ISIS in Iraq and the Sahel. So we would obviously highlight that this is still a risk despite the reduced headlines on it. And of course, there are different occupancies, etc., that are at risk. What we've seen on the terrorism side in particular is that people are targeted more than property. And of course, this is if you look at the headlines over the last few weeks, you will see, or a few months, you will see that there is a big targeting of Jewish institutions. If you look at Manchester attack, but also the Bondi Beach. So of course, that's one area of concern that we have. So to conclude, war is a risk, and you can see very easily why. Sabotage is a big rising peril within Europe, but also globally, and it's focusing predominantly on critical infrastructure that we see, like transportation, energy, etc. And SRCC is a risk that continues to be one of concern for us. And then finally, terrorism is another risk that we see as rising in the next 12 to 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Serge and colleagues, for that roundup. Now, dear guests, we're very happy to take your questions, and we can do this through the slido.com platform. You'll see that on the WebEx portal. You'll see some entry. You can put that in, and you can also vote for questions. We'll try and mix up the questions and try and take those questions with the greatest interest where we can. You can also, if you're using a handheld, just scan the QR code here, and that should take you straight in to Slido or online through the browser, slido.com, where you can join as a participant, and you enter the passcode AZC-1, AZC-1, to put your questions in there. So we'll give it a moment for questions to come in, and for my colleagues to also read what is coming in, and we will take a couple here. I'll take this one from Daniel. Thank you for this, Daniel. Geopolitical risks have risen to their highest ever position. What are some of the main actions companies should be taking to monitor and mitigate such threats? Serge, I'll give that one to you, please.
Thanks, Hugo. So yes, of course. Yeah, it has risen, as I've just alluded to. I think we see a number of things that our company can do. I think the key few points to raise, I think that obviously understanding its geographical footprint is very, very important. So that's on a high level. Where is it located, and which country is it exposed in? As I alluded to earlier, there is regional variation in terms of types of risks that they have. So I guess the other type of monitoring or kind of actions that companies should take is try to understand what is in the vicinity of their own premises. So where we see risk is sometimes based around city centres, political institutions, main transportation hubs, etc. Obviously, if you are based in out of town kind of office complexes, it's probably less of a risk than being in the city centre. So understanding actually the neighbourhood that you're in is also very, very important. The profile of the company is equally important. So what we see is the rise of sabotage, but potentially also terrorism, based specifically around companies and the stance that they have to, let's say, environmental policy, or the type of things that they do generally globally, the things that they supply, the industry that they operate in. So understanding the profile of the company itself is also very important, and to act accordingly. And then finally, I guess you do need to monitor the events around your premises. You know, you have your property and your business interruption, but also you've got your staff to look after. So looking at physical security at offices, trying to diversify the way workforce can work. So if you are footloose, you can work from home, and encourage staff to work remotely. Obviously, if you're in manufacturing, then the physical security element would be much, much more important, and kind of monitoring the news and the media to anticipate risks is also very important. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Serge, very much. Thanks to Daniel for that question. There's two questions around natural catastrophes, one from Caroline, and then Angela McClellan has asked, what is your analysis of climate and environmental risk? Michael, I think I'll come to you. Can you explain to us what, looking at natural catastrophes and climate change, which have fallen in the barometer ranking year on year, what do you think are the reasons behind that? And what is your analysis or current analysis of climate and environmental risk from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Hubert. Happy to take that question. So I think, or I want to start with a quote from our CEO of Allianz SE, Oliver Bäte. He made a statement or a very interesting comment at the World Economic Forum in Davos, by saying, also relating to climate, which relates to the climate change risk. We need to look through really the short-term noise to identify long-term signals, and I think that fits very well, because the lower ranking doesn't mean climate risk is easing. I would say it's a relative shift, not a risk reduction. So we see other risks like cyber, AI have accelerated sharply, but the short-term experience, I would say, because the survey, of course, reflects very much the risk perception, the risk awareness. So those short-term topics creates the kind of noise, and we shouldn't forget that natural catastrophes, the insured losses still exceed $100 billion for the sixth consecutive year. And looking through the noise to find the signal, I think we see as well rising exposures, increasing severity, and more frequent secondary perils, such as floods, wildfires, and convective storms. So that means there is a long-term kind of trend driven by climate change, which kind of amplifies extreme weather events and insured losses around natural catastrophes. And also maybe a last point on that one. So climate risk is really increasingly embedded in other top risks. So take business interruptions. So it's a kind of risk amplifier, I would say. So business interruption and supply chain disruption, political instability, food insecurity, but then also regulatory change and liability risks. So these effects are really captured high up in the ranking rather than disappearing.
Thanks very much, Michael. We'll take a question here from Oliver Schott. Coming back to you, Serge, I think it's a question on left-wing terrorism and your view there, taking into account what happened in Berlin, the energy sabotage and breakdown, and the relating to Mate, currently condemned in Hungary for I think it says 8 years imprisonment. Serge, what would you say to left-wing terrorism as a risk?
It's not the biggest risk, I would say, in Europe. I think if we classify environmental activism stroke terrorism as left wing, then potentially this is the field that, you know, maybe this is where that question comes from. I would say that yes, particularly looking at environmental sabotage and also environmental activism more generally, that used to be traditionally associated with acts of nuisance, so relatively light protests targeting specific areas of cities or businesses. What we see now is with the kind of rolling back of some of the environmental promises or extending of the deadlines for net zero, we see that this movement, I suppose, this activism is turning more extreme, and that's what certainly I think we saw in Germany a few weeks ago. I'm not familiar with my T case, but I'm guessing it's relating to this sort of impact. Yeah, I mean, it's, of course, if it's classified as terrorism or sabotage, that people need to be tried in the same way, but I need to look at that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks very much, Serge. I'm going to take this anonymous question, which I think is one I'll put towards Thomas Sepp, if you please. What do this year's top risk developments tell us about the risk landscape in 26? And what is the impact we're seeing on the claims environment? You lead the claims function for Allianz Commercial globally. So are there any results you find surprising with risks maybe ranked higher than expected? Several questions in there, but perhaps you can choose your focus.
Yes, I will try to answer them in, excuse me, also building on Michael's comment. I think there's something surprising in it. I think, yes, the AI topic was surprising. I mean, there was a significant lift up in terms of mentionings. Yeah, and I think we talked about that a little bit. On the NatCat side, I'd say that we certainly also benefited from a year that had NatCats, but I think they were not with that dramatic impact, with some exceptions. One exception, for example, being obviously the wildfires in California, what happened in Los Angeles. Yeah, but then we had no major hurricane this year in the United States. We had a few cyclones in the Pacific, but no material impact on highly developed or industrial areas, so that would have a significant impact on supply chain. So I think maybe that contributed to the fact that the perception of the relative importance of NatCat came a little bit down and got superseded, in particular by the cyber and AI risk, where we had actually, as Teresa pointed to, quite a number of remarkable events on the cyber side, right? So I think from that element, that was a pretty busy year. And I tend to believe that people actually keep that in their memories when they go and assess those different questions. Now, on the claims side, I wouldn't say there has been something completely unexpected where we would say, oops, that's something we haven't seen. We see obviously continued trends in areas which include certainly on the liability side, US exposures, litigation environments, and so on. I think we also, if I go back in my memory, saw increasing number of energy-related losses. Yeah, that, I don't know, no clear pattern behind it, but there was a bit more around turbines being in wind farms or in energy production. And obviously, sorry, I should obviously mention that aviation. Yeah, if you look at the situation in the aviation world about the number of planes that crashed over the last 12 to 18 months, that actually was an unusual, very high number. Yeah, that was in, I think, Asia, there was in the United States a few, and there were even a few more than just the big headlines, because we were also aware of a few other incidents that were more smaller flights and not the big airlines that get into the headlines immediately. That, I would say, from a claims perspective, definitely did stand out, and I hope that gives some flavor into those different discussions.
Thanks very much, Thomas. I'm going to go to Teresa with this next question from Shaban Shah. Are cyber policies evolving to cover the AI risks that you displayed, or are these already covered in the policies that are already available in the market? So how's the cyber market responding to AI risk, Teresa?
Thank you for the question. I obviously can't speak to any individual policy terms and conditions, so I'll just say broadly speaking, generally cyber forms in the market, the definitions therein are very broad, and they were sort of purpose built that way to respond to evolving exposures and technology risk. I think when you have broad definitions like that, sometimes it introduces an element of a gray area. And so you're seeing more carriers in the market create endorsements or standalone products that sort of affirmatively use the words artificial intelligence to really call or spell out that is contemplated. But I would argue it's probably in most of the base policy language that's been out there for the last 15 years. It's, you know, when you have a computer system as a defined term in a policy wording, computer system can sometimes be very broad.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. Let's take a look at Stefano's interesting question here. Stefano's asking, what is, according to your opinion, the most unpredictable risk, the one whose trajectory or pace has a high level of unpredictability within the risk described in the Allianz Risk Barometer? Michael, you are our head of risk advisory. Advise us on this. What is the most unpredictable risk in your opinion? Please, colleagues, jump in as well if you would like to contribute.
Yeah, thanks for the challenging question, because it's not easy to answer, of course, but I would vote definitely for the geopolitical risk, because I would say what we are seeing there, it's not really easy to predict. I would describe it as a non-linear escalation we are seeing there. So also policy decisions override market logic, you could also say. It's driven by political intent, ideology, domestic pressure, and all those things. So those combination, I would say, and geopolitical risk are also a strong multiplier across other topics. So interfering with business interruption, trade barriers, sanctions, border closures. Then you have the supply chain disruption, which forces a lot of our clients really to reshore and cyber risk, also kind of state-sponsored attacks, energy risk, price shocks, political violence, civil unrest. Serjan described very well. So I would definitely see geopolitical risk as extremely difficult, or kind of a surprising element, definitely, in the results of the risk barometer.
Hugo, would you allow me to comment on non-surprising elements in the context of that question?
Go ahead.
Just to make the counter a little bit, which is, I think, for me, California wildfires was an interesting thing, because that was for sure no surprise. That was listed on potential damage scenario in every insurance company that writes that stuff very, very high up the list. And I think we have quite a number more of them, right? I mean, we could go, I don't know, earthquake in Turkey, flooding in Jakarta, flooding in Thailand. I mean, we can add to the list. And Michael will be very well placed to add to that conversation. So I think that's another insight for me in it. The likelihood that something on the NatCat side that is marked today already as a high risk has an increasing probability to happen over coming years, given the situation on climate change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I need to do a bit of advertising now. That's where then also our risk engineering division offers great capabilities and tools. One's going to be the CARES tool to exactly model for any asset portfolio out what becomes even more exposed around it. And that for me was one learning out of the California thing. What is earmarked as likely to happen will very likely happen. So everyone would be well advised to build up resilience and mitigation strategies around it. And that's also, I think, where insurers can help, because obviously mitigation also is the better thing than actually getting paid afterwards.
Yeah, thanks very much, Thomas, for that additional perspective. I'm going to come on actually to, they were talking about CARES, which is a digital solution that's been offered to look at how climate risk affects locations and clients in the future, to look at climate resilience. But here we have an interesting question. combining the human and maybe the technological perspective. From the anonymous question is, how much do you see risk management still as a human and workshop-based activity? And to come to better risk management, don't we need to have digital risk management solutions? What trends and solutions do we see here? Mikhail, I know you're very closely involved in developing some of these solutions. Perhaps you would like to start with that, and please, colleagues, jump in if needed.
Yeah, happy to start with that one. So how human is risk management today? I would say it's highly human driven. It's expert judgment, workshops, heat maps, interviews, strengths. It's, I would say, context, experience, and really strategic interpretation. You have limitations. It can be subjective, slow, often backward looking. That's one thing. So therefore, the question, do we need digital risk management solutions? Yes, definitely yes. And we need to invest into kind of proactive risk management. So we as Allianz, but our clients as well, and cover really the full spectrum of risk management, starting with early identification of the risks and then down to the risk transfer, where we as an insurer, of course, play an important role. Because like Thomas said, we as risk engineers help clients, of course, in the insurance process to evaluate the risk on behalf of underwriting and to support the client. But we help as well in the kind of early identification of risk evaluation, and then to come up with loss prevention measures and resilience services like our CARES tool, which is a tool to identify, but also a kind of dedicated engineering service where we help the clients to make their locations resilient against natural catastrophes. So it's a kind of full spectrum of risk management solutions which need to be automated and digitalized, no question at all. But we see also from our clients a high demand of sending an engineer then to the location, because it differs so much from the industry segment, from the location, from the kind of horizon they are taking to invest into resilience measures. So therefore, this human element also in the kind of risk advisory service will remain a very important element.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. We probably have time for one more question. It's a very interesting question here from Greet, asking about how companies can adequately measure their risk due to the decline of democracy, polarization, loss of trust, etc. in political institutions. What measures should they take to mitigate their risks? Now, this is a very wide-ranging question indeed, and it's actually one that at Allianz we often think about. Maybe I'll have a go myself as I look after the communications side here, and it's very closely related to that. And we spend a lot of time scanning the environment, looking at how trends are developing, which may erode trust in institutions and indeed in organizations. And if you look at, for example, the excellent work from Edelman, the well-known consultancy with their trust barometer, related distantly to the risk barometer, they're looking very closely at what drives polarization, what drives public opinion. And they're looking this year, I don't want to speak for them, they can speak for themselves, but check it out online. Very interesting commentary on how people are becoming increasingly isolated and less trustful of external institutions. And I think one of the key challenges that we see at Allianz, it's in our name, Alliance, indeed, is to really bring things together, to try to build bridges across different opinions, not to take a political position, but to have a purpose which helps to build resilience and support our clients in times of a lot of uncertainty. And I think what we as an organization doing is very much looking to diversify, to build resilience, to look at supply chain resilience, to look at how we can build local expertise and, of course, actively monitor political credit risks, geopolitical risks, to try and stay ahead by scanning. And it's a very interesting question, this, and I can't give you a precise answer, but please, colleagues, jump in.
Yeah, I would add another view to it. I think you already offered a few good thoughts about how you deal with it. I think like I would add a step before, right? Because you have a risk today. The risk as such, it's not the problem. The problem is the damage it could do when it materializes. So I would always advise, take the risks you see, translate them into what will happen if they materialize, if necessary on a scenario basis. And then, like we do in our world, we would map that out. How likely is that this will happen, and what's the damage to our organization that it would cause? And then I think you can focus your mitigation strategies on what do I need to change that if and when the damage occurs, it's less material. Yeah, that could be I change supply chains, I buy insurance, I look for different partners, I find alliances. That's in all things that can be brought into the equation how to mitigate it, right? And then sometimes you can control also the question whether the risk materializes or not. You probably can't do that on, I don't know, rioting. You don't control that, but there might be other things where you have an ability to also influence the likelihood of the risk materializing. And I think that's quite demanding work, I would admit, but I think that's the way. It needs that, I think, chain of things, risk, impact, assessment, mitigation, that then helps you as a company to actually prepare for those things.
Thank you, Thomas. That's a very good summary, which I think, I'm afraid, dear friends, colleagues and guests, we will have to end on. It is now an hour since we started. You can download the report online or through the QR code here. Please check it out. Please take part in the survey later this year. We look forward to hearing your views because we are certainly stronger together with your help. I would like to thank my colleagues, Serge, Teresa, Thomas and Michael, and my excellent team behind the scenes for an excellent webinar. Thank you for joining us. Please keep in touch with Allianz and have a good rest of the day wherever in the world you are. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.